Hello, all. My name's Kim, and on behalf of the iMoot team, I'd like to thank you all for joining us and introduce Stuart Mealor. He's going to talk about the mobile Moodle MOOC and tell you a little bit about it. So you're off and running, Stuart. Oh, I can't hear you, Stu.
Sorry.
There we go.
Thanks, Kim. As is traditional at these iMoots and Mini Moots, I've put my webcam on just to say hello, and probably the majority of people watching this will probably be watching a rerun. We've got a small select group of people here at the moment. I'll turn this off in a second. I think probably a lot of people in the Moodle world know me by now anyway. And this presentation is essentially an update to something that we did at the iMoot, the main event, previously this year. And in that situation, we hadn't actually run the Moodle Mobile MOOC. It's a bit of a mouthful, but we actually have run it now. And in fact, we're running it again this very week. It actually starts again this week. So it seemed like good timing to talk about that. So I'm going to turn my webcam off just because we don't really need it and it slows things down. And I'll get into the presentation. So we can skip through some of these early slides, which are obviously prepared in case we have lots of people here, give them something to do, and no chance to relax. So I think I probably know everyone here and which countries they're from. And I suppose for the audience that are watching the recording of this particular session, there could be, people from all around the world, obviously, of various different levels of Moodle experience. And some teachers, some technologists, other people working in not-for-profits or administration and so on. I did prepare this with some questions. So at least watching the rerun, you can actually think about this. And I do have some statistics in this updated presentation. So the types of things we ask people would be, have you used Moodle on a tablet? Have you actually used Moodle on a smartphone, an iPhone or a Toshiba or Samsung or one of these new amazing devices? Whether you've actually used the Moodle mobile app itself, which is something that's been developed over the past few years, and it's got obviously much better over the years. I could actually put that little yes/no vote thing in. It's a very cool feature of Big Blue Button these days. We should probably promote that as well. I'm a huge fan of Big Blue Button, and having a little feature like this that can actually dynamically pick out poll questions is just absolutely superb. So people can answer, and then as the teacher, I can just publish that result for everyone to see. So, great feature of Big Blue Button. Yeah, Trish, that's an interesting comment straight away. Those of us who are, should I say mature, those of us that are older than 25, 30, probably do all feel like doing work on a mobile phone is too fiddly. The screen's too small. We're not typing at 100 miles an hour with two thumbs like the average 10-year-old. So perhaps it is a technology that we're not as comfortable with as our laptops and desktops, and that's actually a theme that we will return to. And for people that have used the Moodle mobile app itself, we also asked them, do they feel highly competent with it? And one of the responses, or the response that we get from people on this sort of question, is that most teachers have tried using the Moodle mobile app, but in fact they they struggled with it. They couldn't see the use of it. They felt like a lot was missing. They weren't quite sure what the focus was. So we get a very low percentage generally of people who say they feel entirely competent with it. So that was part of the driver for us designing this course. And then finally, we sort of asked people, have you ever actually designed a Moodle course with mobile access specifically in mind? Most of us probably design our courses for consumption on standard computers, desktops and laptops. Not so many of us have tried designing something specifically for mobile access, and there are some key differences in there which we'll explore here. So essentially, this session is just sharing our experiences from how we developed and ran the Moodle Mobile MOOC, some sharing of our design processes. I'm not going to go into the details of the content today because you can actually join this event for free anyway and see that for real, actually experience that content. So there's no need for us to go into those details here. Just briefly, the background of our company, HRDNZ, we've been a Moodle partner for 10 years, and essentially we simplify our analysis by saying 1/3 of what we do is around training, 1/3 is around hosting and technical work, and 1/3 is around development. So, that's ballpark figures, obviously. Interestingly, more than half of our work is actually overseas. It's actually not within New Zealand. That's partly because New Zealand's obviously a small country, and partly because we've become well known overseas as well. Hello, Wendy. Nice to see you. Our website is there, and you can go and visit that to find out more about our organisation if you wish. So why would we run and design a Moodle Mobile MOOC, which I will tell you took many, many hours to develop? Well, the first thing we have to say is that, we've been a Moodle partner for 10 years. We wanted to do something that was out there for people for free. We do a number of things for free, but we wanted some sort of, real high profile free event for people. And so this was part of that. So let's have a look at some of the details around this. So making the site work, we had to decide early on whether we were just going to offer this Moodle Mobile MOOC as a course within one of our more established sites, or whether we were going to have a dedicated site for this. And ultimately, after trying a few things out, we realized that we're going to get far more flexibility by creating a specific site for this. So it's just on a subdomain of our main training site. And what does that really mean then for us running a MOOC? Well, we put a limit on the MOOC of 1,000 users, and that's because we basically felt that if we had more than that, we probably wouldn't be able to service and manage the forums, with just two of us, which I'll explain later. So we put a limit on it of 1,000 users, but even that means that there is likely an average of 42 users per hour on the system at any one time. We could tell from looking at the participants that we have about 20% from New Zealand, not surprising, and then a large number from USA, France, UK, and India. And because the working day rotates around the world, I'm painfully aware of this, being in New Zealand, that we're on the wrong time zone for most people. We calculated out, just using some of our ballpark figures, that could mean at the busiest times there might be 100 users online within the site at any one time, and obviously we had to specify the server and the environment to be appropriate for that. However, it's not a traditional course, it's not a traditional site. We are expecting people to be accessing this from their mobile devices. And that, of course, means probably two things that we can say that in terms of the patterns of access that are different. And the first one is that people are going to be accessing small pieces of information that are lightweight, but accessing those often. And that there will be lots of short activity, but fewer long connections. E.g., if we're delivering content to mobile devices, we're probably not going to expect people to watch streaming movies for 20 minutes. So, these two factors really are two of the big players in how we might have to design the course and the content. So the MOOC itself is structured over 4 weeks. And what visitors to the site would see is an information area, which obviously has guest access. There's then a preparation area, which people need to enroll in. And then, of course, we can communicate with them in there. And then the 4 weeks of the course split into different focuses, I guess, within Moodle, within mobile Moodle use. First of all, communication, then resources, then activities and media. And at the end, a separate course for the badge and certificate issue. And of course, the requisite hidden testing course, which for anyone who's developed a Moodle site, we all have a hidden testing course where we have to try things out. So that's actually what's happening in the structure and the background, I guess. One of the things we decided to do very early on was to have this MOOC event running in 2 languages, in English and in French. And for any of you that do work with multilingual or duolingual or trilingual Moodle sites, you'll know that there are a variety of different approaches here that one could take. And I'm just going to explain how and why we took the process that we did. So myself and Jean-Marc, so I'm facilitating and writing the English side and Jean-Marc the French side. We decided very early on that we would not have separate courses for the different languages, but combine both into the same course. And one of the reasons for that was actually the fact that many people who would do take part in the MOOC, who are native French speakers, many of those also speak English as well as a second language. Some of them speak and write incredibly good English. And we didn't want those people to miss out on the forum discussions in English. So if they'd have been in separate courses, that would have been quite difficult to give them access to that. So we decided early on that everyone, even though they're in different languages, can access all forums. And of course, the English people who speak a little bit of French can go and practice their French like I did. Not too much, I have to say, but a little bit. So one of the things that we use throughout this system, because once we've got 2 groups, one group in English and one group in French, we then started to really make heavy use of the Moodle language filter, which is, standard in Moodle. Again, anyone who perhaps teaches languages online will be almost certainly incredibly familiar with this. But essentially, we can take some content in English, news and announcements. We can have the content translated to French, nouvelles et annonces. And using this simple code to say that the span of this next section, the language is English, and it's part of the multi-lang filter. So we create a span and then an end span, and then we just copy that same thing again, but we have span lang equals French. So this all just uses the 2-letter ISO country commands, designations. So Spanish would be ES and German would be DE. And then we just put the French content here and end that span. So what happens is if your profile is set to English, the filter will automatically show you the English section and hide the French. If your language is set to French, it will show you the French content and hide the English. And that's that's a really simple, effective way to do this. And of course, you could add another span there for Spanish and another span for German. So it just filters based on the language. Really very effective, simple system. As you use it more and more, you do sort of start to perhaps get a little bit. It can appear a little bit confusing once you have lots of multi or alternative languages in there. So this is exactly the same thing. But this is actually content rather than a label or a heading. So we actually have, the English content surrounded by the English language filter. And then we have the French language filter and the French language content. So obviously, if I then had German language content and Spanish language content, this is going to be relatively a long piece of text. And most of it, to my English-speaking eye, most of it is not going to make much sense. So it can be a little bit overwhelming when you first use it, but it's actually, you get used to it surprisingly quickly. And of course, as I said, adding another language like Spanish would actually be very easy now. Your Spanish teacher could just come along, copy those codes, use ES for the Espanol, and translate into Spanish. Yeah, Kim, it is very cool. I think it's very cool. It is worth mentioning there are a couple of things that do not get translated by the filter, and probably the most critical one to be aware of is that the course short name cannot be translated, and that's because that's a critical value within the Moodle database. If you were running a course this year in science, the course short name might be 2016 science. That is such a key value within all the URLs that are used and the logs and the reports and enrollments. That's something that's set in stone within the database, so you can't change that. So one of the things that we do is use very simple course titles in that case, so that even people who are operating in another language, most French people can understand Moodle activities. Not quite the same spelling as they would be used to in French, but it's very clear to them what that course actually is. So something to be aware of. As I said, it does take some getting used to as a teacher, and perhaps this is the most awkward thing, is that as a teacher in the editing view, you can see the background, if you like, here, that there's a span and some content. But when you, as a teacher, are looking at this, you're seeing all that code without obviously the span commands are in the background there in the HTML view. But it does mean that the English and the French content are actually running together here, and not too bad in a small description field like that. But obviously, if you have larger resources with 2 or 3 languages, it can look very squashed and a bit unwieldy. But not too bad once you understand what you're looking at and why. So I did say that we have 2 languages here, French and English. So we have 2 groups. Now, one of the things that many teachers perhaps not aware of, again, unless you're teaching multilingual courses, is that you can actually set, so just like you can set an assignment to be available to only one group and hidden from a different group, you can actually set whole topics to only be available. So sections, usually topics or weeks, but you can set whole sections to be available only for a set group and hidden from the other group. So once we realized that and tested it out, we realized that what we could do is basically replicate topics throughout the course and alternatively set them to be available for French or French and English throughout the course. So it means that we can keep everything together in a kind of linear structure, but it's actually very easy for the two teachers to compare and to work within both sections as well. And obviously we just have a different enrollment key for each group to make sure that they join the correct group to begin with. So how does that look in terms of the logistics? Well, we have our information area, which is duolingual. The information in there, if you're in French, will give you the enrollment key to join the French group in the preparation area. And obviously, if you're English, you can join the English group in the preparation area. And we can then have a news forum in that preparation area with two groups, and we can then feed in things like news items and enrollment keys for further courses and so on. And then within each specific course, a section here, which is written by me in English on the comments functionality within Moodle, and that topic is set to be only visible to the English group. And then directly below that is Jean-Marc's commentaries block, topic, which is obviously set to be visible to French only. So students only see the topic that's related to their language, but as teachers we see both of them side by side, which is actually a really good way to work together, rather than the alternative that we had right at the beginning of the decision-making process, which would be to have two separate courses. We found this to be a very workable solution still. So that was good. And these drawings, I have to say, I've just got an iPad Pro, which is where you have the pen and you can draw out your diagrams. And although these illustrations obviously are not as correct or perhaps as technically fantastic as what we could do with drawing tools in software packages, I've actually found that it's really helped me go back to scribbling on paper, scribbling ideas and then working things out and rubbing it out and putting an arrow in and changing the color. It's become a very nice organic way of working again when thinking about concepts like this. So if you are a visual designer or thinker, I can only highly recommend using the iPad Pro and the pencil to do these things. It's absolutely brilliant. And of course, you can then capture that, put it into Evernote or Dropbox. If you put it into Evernote, it will actually scan your terrible writing and do OCR, so that you can even search for that note later, which I really love. But I do have to watch my handwriting because, as you can see, it's pretty poor. Anyway, that was a slight digression. So our courses are set up with two groups and a different enrollment key for each. And this is how it looks in reality, with some sections, some topics in there: forums in English, forums in French, messaging in English, messaging in French, and a very workable way of designing a duolingual course. And if you want to know how to do that and you haven't seen that before, you simply click on the edit button, turn editing on, click on the edit button next to the topic. And what we actually do is add a restriction. You may use this similar system on a activity level for an assignment or a forum that you only want to be available to certain groups. Same thing. Add a restriction. We then select the group option. And in this particular example, I've said that this is restricted, and the student must match the following group as English to actually see that content. So just like any normal grouping option. Interestingly, the thing that nearly caught us out, or that we in fact didn't realize how important it was this little I at the side. Because that I, rather than just saying this activity is not available for your group, which would make the course look very messy, clicking the I actually completely hides it from the other groups. They don't see it at all. And that's what therefore means that an English person only sees all the English topics, and someone in the French group will only see the French topics. They won't even see the other topics. They won't see a message saying it's not available. It's just not there. And that creates a very clean design for both groups, both languages. And there is a little, although the I is there, it's only when you hover over the eye itself that you see this little pop-up which tells you that. So that's quite easily missed if people are just exploring these sorts of restrictions. Quite easily missed, and in terms of the impact that can have. So the other one is completely hidden, as we said. And as a teacher, you'll see these little reminders, which are obviously quite useful. We did consider actually restricting by language rather than by groups, and that was something that we tried early on. The reason we didn't do it that way is because there were some issues with the Moodle mobile app itself and different languages. Now, I know that the new Moodle mobile app was literally released last week with lots of new features and functionality. I haven't had a chance to check out whether it now works perfectly with language filters. That's something that we can obviously look into. It may mean that we change the course design in the future, and we don't use groups, but we use languages. But that's something that right now we haven't had time to look at before this week. We did have a slightly different Challenger course in the information area, which is the public area, in that we couldn't force only English or French, because if someone was visiting and their browser was set in German, they might not see anything at all. And that's because Moodle will show you content based on your language and your Moodle profile, but if you're not logged in, it will actually show content based on things like the operating system and the browser language. And if you've traveled around the world with your computer and tried logging into different Moodle sites, it is interesting. Sometimes you get some very interesting language effects. If you've got an English language computer and you're visiting a site in Spain from somewhere in Italy, the languages can get a bit mixed up. But we have to remember that the preparation area or the information area has to perhaps have a little extra thought in there. So one of the things that we wanted to do is to ensure that this Moodle Mobile MOOC, even though it's completely free for everyone, we wanted to ensure that it's at the same level of content and design and facilitation as our commercial offerings and what we do day to day with clients and so on. So we wanted to have it as a really high quality product, and basically we had that attitude that let's make this as good as if people are paying for it. People get very disappointed very quickly if things aren't right when they've paid for something, and we wanted to we can use that as a quality driver for ourselves to say this is good, but it's not good enough, let's improve it, and that goes into our design process. So as the main content developer for the English, I actually set up 4 users and spent a lot of time with 4 users all concurrently logged in. Myself as the teacher, I had a student account who was in English but sometimes changed to Spanish or to test the non-English, non-French impact. I then had another student called Honey who had French language set in her profile and in the app. And you have to set your language in the app. And then obviously I had admin to make changes that would affect things at a site level and course level. So during the development process, a lot of the time I was actually logged in as 4 users so I could quickly understand the impacts of the changes I was making. And more than that, we used multiple browsers. So again, we were within that development process. Rather than doing this testing at the end, we're actually doing the testing as we are producing. So for me, I'd be generally using a MacBook Pro as I'm developing, as my development machine, and then I'd be logged in as the teacher in Safari, as Sylvester, the English student who sometimes wants to speak Spanish, in Firefox, admin using Opera, and Honey, who's the French student, is using the SRware Iron, which is, if you're not familiar with that as a browser, it's basically very much like Google Chrome. It's based on Chromium, which is the open source browser that Google borrowed and built on, and it's interesting because it actually, as a browser, it does all the same things, but it removes all the kind of options that Google have for spying on you and collecting data. And it's a browser that came out of the European Union, based on some of the requirements for data protection that are over there. So basically, you could use Chrome if you don't care about those sorts of things. So 4 users and 4 different browsers. And of course, that means that I'm not having to log in and out of different browsers all the time to during this development cycle. And then the icing on the cake almost is that we're then testing on multiple devices as well. So I'm using my MacBook Air, which is obviously a smaller screen. I'm using my iPad Pro, which is kind of the leading edge of things at the moment, and I'm using an Apple iPad 1, which is a long-suffering machine. It plays music to my children. It plays a lot of Paw Patrol and Sesame Street. But interestingly, it still, of course, works perfectly fine as a browser. Also using my iPhone, new iPhone 7. I cracked the screen on that today, if you can believe that. And I've got an old iPhone 3 because we have to test against things that aren't all modern and up to date. I also had a very cheap Android 7-inch tablet. And someone else tested on Windows 8 for us. I don't use any Windows, so but clearly we do need to test for Windows users. So those 3 areas of multiple users, multiple browsers, and multiple environments. That's the kind of level that you have to be at to make sure that this content and this course is going to work effectively for everyone. I'm just going to mention something here that we discovered during our development process, which is something called a mobile app restriction. Okay, and this is a plugin. There's a link to the plugin there, and it's called the Moodle Mobile Availability plugin. Once it's installed, and you can see here, this is just a normal add restriction dialog box where we might often use activity completion or dates or groups and so on, but now we've got an additional mobile app option in terms of these restrictions. So what does that do? Well, what we're able to do is, this is the key point really, the second point here, this plugin lets you display different content to browser users or people that are using the Moodle mobile app. So you could have, for example, 2 pages, one that is quite heavy, maybe some quite large graphics, lots of text, a heavy page. You could duplicate that. using Moodle's duplicate function. You could take out the heavy images or replace them with much lighter weight images, for example. You could trim down the text to just the essentials. And then you could use this Moodle mobile app restriction to restrict access to those two different resources based on whether the viewer is using a browser or they are using the Moodle mobile app itself. So that's gives us a huge capability, really, that we weren't aware of when we started on this project. So that was an amazing find. So we have now, yeah, it is nice, Vinny. It really is nice. Give it a try. Very easy, very straightforward, and yeah, it gives you so much more flexibility with your if you're designing a course for both browser users and mobile, then it gives you a great option. If you're just designing something just for mobile users, then you probably don't need it, because everything that you design should be optimized and formatted for that delivery method anyway. But for multi-format, multi-delivery environments, it's fantastic. So we actually ran this MOOC earlier in the year, and we got some really interesting data. You know, one of the byproducts of running an event like this is that you're able to get real world data and experience that you just don't get by reading other people's reports into their events and their course design. You know, primary data, there's nothing like it, and I love having that and actually saying, you know, we saw that happen for real. And so some of the primary data that we've been able to gather. So first of all, we were able to look at, and this was just, you know, data taken during the first couple of days or weeks, really. We were able to see where people were coming from for their sessions. Lots of people coming from France, because you know, there were not a lot of opportunities for free online courses in Moodle over in France, so the uptake was really tremendous there. And then, as we said, you know, a lot of people coming from the United States and New Zealand and Australia, as we'd expect, and then, you know, other countries, all kind of, you know, 3, 4, 5%, which is interesting. We can, excuse me, we can see data regarding the language that their browsers or devices were set to. So again, as we would probably expect from the previous slide, French and US English, the most highly represented, and then English, you know, GB, Great Britain, and French. I'm not quite sure what French is, but maybe that's if you're, for example, in Algeria, so you're selecting a language in that way, and then Dutch and Australian English and New Zealand English and Canadian English, you know, and a bit of Portuguese and German as well. So you know, a fair mix. Perhaps more interestingly for us, although that's not, you know, the first stuff interesting, but we can kind of see that anyway based on participants. What we couldn't see is data like this. So on this particular day, or when we took this particular snapshot, you know, it might just be capturing an hour of a particular day. We can see that 35%, about a third of people, are using Windows. So this is our sort of desktop, or this is what the operating system has been reported as. And that, to me, suggests that a large percentage of our teachers on this MOOC who should have been using mobile devices, a lot of them were actually using Windows Desktop to access the course, which says an awful lot on its own, perhaps, about how comfortable we are accessing a course like this from our smartphone and our tablet. Lots of people we think we're actually accessing from a normal Windows laptop and desktop. And then, of course, we've got well represented Android. That's great. Lots of Android mobile users out there. Lots of iOS, as we'd expect, and a few Linux, which was pretty good. If we look at mobile devices only, we can see almost 60% of the users using Android devices and about 40% using iOS. The Windows, operating system, almost ignorable. I mean, it's just so tiny in comparison to the domination of the other two systems. Whether that tells us anything about the way we should be designing the course or the content, not quite sure. But what it does tell me is that just because myself and most of our team have all got modern, up-to-date iPhones, that certainly isn't the case for the majority of users on this MOOC. So we shouldn't be trying to design, taking into account how fast and brilliant the iPhone is. Clearly, a lot of people might be using slower, maybe smaller screen devices. And again, we can pull out some data in terms of the actual devices people are using. Interestingly, by far the biggest tablet use is the Apple iPad, and some of that may actually be me because I'm of course testing that all the time. iPhones, or even flashy Android phones. There's some good Android phones out there now, but we can see Samsung and Sony, lots of Samsung obviously represented there. I guess if we add up all the Samsungs, they come to far more than the Apple iPhone. So that's where our previous slide can be perhaps understood a little bit more. But I was quite interested with the Sony because I haven't, certainly here in New Zealand, don't see a lot of Sony users. It tends to be Samsung and Apple. So that was quite interesting. And perhaps one of the final pieces of really useful information for us was seeing the screen resolution that people are using. Now, again, the second one there, 768 by 1024, I'm pretty sure that is a standard kind of desktop or laptop, probably Windows laptop size. But interestingly, the number 1 screen size and the number 3, 4, 5, they're all much smaller. And I think that does send us a message in terms of our course design and content, which is that you should, if you're designing a mobile course, you should never really be trying to design for a screen size. That is, for a specific screen size. I was challenged on that statement a couple of days ago, very, very succinctly, with a teacher who said, well, I'm designing my mobile course for the students in my school, and we give them all an iPad. So, okay, that's a situation where you do know the screen size that your users are using, so perhaps you can do that. But I think with any public or wider audience, then trying to design anything for a set screen size is probably a big mistake, and we have to rely on responsiveness and understanding that screens are going to be dynamically resizing and moving this text and the content around. Design for the content, but don't design for the resolution. It's probably the big message there. And it's nice to see that for ourselves. And then I think finally, this again was one of the pieces of primary data that we really enjoyed seeing over a set period, I think of a week, where we had about 12,000 page views. The average number of pages people looked at was 20, and the average session duration was 14 minutes. And that was great, because if you read around on the internet with various research on how do people access mobile learning, you will see that figure of kind of 14, 15 minutes, that is the one that comes through time and time again. People do not sit down and do mobile learning for half an hour or an hour or 2 hours at a time. They do jump in for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then they're out again. And it was really nice to see that within our own experience and our own course and our own users, and say, yep, okay, we totally understand that now, and that should definitely feed into our course design. So what now? Well, we made some changes as the mobile app was updated. We refactored quizzes, because quizzes became fully supported in the mobile 3.1. If it proves popular, we're going to run this probably twice a year, May and November. I would like to see it in Spanish as well. There's a huge Spanish community out there. We just need someone who's got the time to actually and motivation to translate this into Spanish for a Spanish audience. And really, the last thing to say is that I'm happy to answer any questions, listen to ideas or suggestions, and this actually started again on the 1st of November. So the 1st of November, we are running this, which was 4 days ago for me, but I'm in New Zealand, so for lots of you, it's probably only 3 days ago. And we, that you can go along, you can read the information area, get the enrollment key from the preparation, and you can join the people that are there this week. And the forums are just starting to get, the last day or two, quite active. Lots of people posting ideas and comments and starting to learn things. So it's not too late to join. If this is an area that is of interest to you, I would say absolutely come along, join. It's not going to cost you anything apart from a couple of hours, that your own investment of your own time. It's a lot of fun. We had some really, really terrific feedback from the first event. And we wouldn't be running it again if we didn't feel that it was successful and valuable for people. So that's the URL, mobile.moodlebytes.com, and you can rock along there and register now. So that concludes the presentation, really. I think in a wider sense, if people wanted to discuss how they've designed mobile courses or multilingual courses, or if you've run a MOOC, and I know I can't think who it is. Someone's doing a MOOC session later today. Is it Ravi? Or if you've had any challenges in doing something similar to this, or if in the future, what do you think your challenges may be? So I'm happy to throw the microphone open to people, and I'll just switch my webcam on as well to finish this bit. If you haven't got audio, you can obviously just type yeah, it is Ravi. Thanks, Scott. Hi, Scott. How are you? If you haven't got audio, or you just prefer to type a question in the chat area, I've got that open now as well. So go for it. Or any comments or questions or clarification, anything that I spoke about that you'd like to perhaps pick up on. I'm just going to have a drink because my voice is going. No questions. That must be a first for me. I obviously wasn't controversial enough, maybe.
This is Kim again. I just want to say I went through the session or the MOOC with you, Stu, and found it to be very enlightening and informative, and really changed my mind about how I design my courses. It got me more comfortable with that app, yeah. And I feel quite comfortable with it now. So, well worth it.
Excellent. Yeah. Thanks, Kim. And I think that is perhaps one of the points that I didn't specifically make there, is that the majority of people went through the course, and at the end they kind of all felt, okay, I get the mobile app now. I understand what it's good at. I understand what it's not good at, and I can perhaps now use that within my context. And that was something that, you know, that was the shift, that was the paradigm shift for a lot of people, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi Trish, sent the details to my course developer. Yeah, good. Get them along this week. I think they can register to the end of the first week, so probably another 3 days, depending on where you are in the world. An old desktop user, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would never attempt to design a course using mobile phone. You know, for me, it's definitely more of a consumption device, not a design. I can do things much quicker on a laptop. You know.
Yeah, I was like Scott. It was you know, difficult to use the app, but I knew I had to use it to get more familiar with it. So I had to force myself to use it. But yeah. But it's coming a long way. Every release just does more and more.
Oh, so. Absolutely. I think the new release, you know, which was last week, I think virtually everything can be completed offline now as well, which is great for people who, you know, are using it with, you know, data connectivity, but don't have a permanent connection.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I'm sure you did cheat, but thanks for trying.
He was one of the Windows users.
Probably. Okay.
I want to thank you again on behalf of the iMoot team for that great presentation. And if there are no other questions, I'm going to stop the recording. So thank you again, Stuart.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.